Hello, Bonsai friends. This is Evan with Underhill Bonsai, and welcome to episode 19 of Little Things for Bonsai People, formerly Bonsai Southeast. And today I'm joined by Carmen Lesko-Wieniawski.
Lesko-Wieniawski.
Jesus. All right. See, I tried it a moment ago. This is not the first time we've tried this today. All right. Anyway, so how you feeling today, Carmen?
I'm all right. My back hurts. I hurt my back, but
Yeah.
it's getting better.
Hurt your back from lifting bonsai trees, I'm assuming?
I don't know. I think so. It was that or making a bed. Maybe both.
Yeah, I guess so. Lifting heavy bonsai trees or trying to put a cover sheet on the bed. But anyway, but yeah, awesome. And then Mike cannot join us today because he is still in India. I believe he's on his way back, but he was over there doing a demo workshop, special thing for Mike to go be one of the first American presentators to go do that in India. It's awesome. But anyway, today we'll be discussing a seasonal check-in. It's going to be another series kind of thing that we do here with the podcast. Previous episode we did bonsai forms and styles. This one's going to be seasonal checkup, seasonal check-in to see what we're doing this time of year, to discuss topics related to what work is appropriate and given the different zones that we're located in. So that should be a nice little thing to go through just to get everybody on the same track and see if there's something you might have missed or something you could be doing this time at this time of year.
Before we get started, though, we need to mention our podcast is sponsored by Underhill Bonsai Nursery, Louisiana's premier bonsai nursery, and our amazing patrons are Bonsai Best Buds. We currently have 3. So thank you very much, Tori Solis. She's been a Best Bud for a few weeks. Our 2 new Best Buds are Warehouse Rat and Boyd Snellgrove. Thank you so much for being a Best Bud and supporting the show. If anyone else listening wants to support the show, go ahead, follow us, like us, subscribe to our social accounts. You can follow Evan at Underhill Bonsai on Facebook and Instagram. You can sign up for the newsletter at underhillbonsai.com. You can follow Mike at Kitsune Bonsai on Facebook and Instagram. He's also got our merch available for purchase on his website, kitsunebonsai.com. And if you want to follow me, Carmen Lesko-Wieniawski, I'm one of the co-founders of the Purple Pot Society, and you can check out the National Women's Bonsai Club at purplepotsociety.org. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and my personal bonsai account is on Instagram under Becoming Bonsai. We also have our own merch now, and that's available on Mike's website, kitsunebonsai.com. Let's see. We've got some new t-shirt designs created by friends of ours with a Little Things logo. Special shout out to Lee Domingue for creating our newest featured design. It says, "I went to a bonsai workshop and all I got was this stump."
Yeah. Haven't we all?
And you could follow him at Southpaw Nola on Instagram. But the most important thing you can do to help support our show is listening. Go ahead and subscribe to us on your favorite platform, and that'll take us a long way. So thanks so much for your support.
I actually came up here to Portland to hang out with Michael Hagedorn and Carmen to come do some seasonal work, I guess you could say. There is a seasonal actually happening, but I think it's the jet lag. I'm still feeling a little nauseated, to be honest, but I think I'm going to be fine. I can see Lou outside the window. Is that Lou?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, outside which window? Where are you?
I can see you on the Zoom call. You know that, right?
Oh, right.
Even though we're in the same building,
we're in different rooms.
We're recording in different rooms. It's just like, what? How did you do that?
How did you see my husband walking across the yard? Oh, well.
Wait, he's just back there. Anyway, so we're talking about a seasonal check-in. So we're going to talk about what should we be doing this time of year and why. And I wanted to kind of talk more about the specifics of repotting and soil compositions a little bit, not get too far into being really worried about breaking down like the sciences of the soils, but to talk about why we repot and what kind of soil we should use for different types of stock. And then we'll kind of check in and see what each of us are doing. Obviously, I'm up here right now, and I'll be taking part in some of the seasonal work happening, but we will kind of give you guys a little bit of a recap or kind of what we're going to be doing. But yeah, so what are we going to be doing this week, Carmen? What's a good idea of what we're doing?
That's a great question. I would love to tell you. So this time of year, I think for almost everybody across the country, we're in repotting season, whether you've started yet or not. Really depends on where you are. I know some of the folks down south have already started repotting. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we've been doing some repotting. I know those folks back east in Michigan and some of those folks in the snowier parts of the country have another month or so before they really dig into it. But spring is the time for repotting. And so that's what we're focusing on this week. We've been colder than usual in Portland, so we'll be doing some other things too. We can still wire some of our conifers out, so we'll be doing some of that. But yeah, I think let's really jump into repotting.
Yeah, with Southeast, and we're going to be particularly talking about the United States and Central region, because obviously in other parts of the world, it's going to be repotting season somewhere else at a different time of year. So, but yeah, for Southeast in Southeast United States range, we're doing repotting earlier. I actually get a head start in Louisiana. I'm sure Mike, if he wanted to, could repot earlier as well, but we're talking about certain types of species. I start repotting some of my deciduous trees, especially whenever they go dormant probably around early December. I'll even get started then.
Oh, and wow, then, that's early.
Yeah, because and this is because of volume of plants and trees that I have to do, considering the thousands of trees at the nursery, and I'm not going to get all of them. But right. Yeah. And then, of course, we would be looking at our Japanese black pine or other. Well, Japanese black pine kind of falls into their own category, especially for my range. They get repotted around mid-February, especially if you lift them from the pot and you see the white roots, the white new roots starting to grow on the ends of the tips. I know up here in the Pacific Northwest, it's a little bit different with pines. Because y'all have white pines, y'all have the ponderosa pine, you have what other pines are available up here?
Limber pine, shore pine, lodgepole pine, red pine. I know somebody with a loblolly. We get all kinds of pines.
That one loblolly that is actually native. Loblolly. It's native to my range, but it's like up here and it's the best one I've seen. But yeah, when do those pines usually get done?
We're doing those now. So we're starting to see, we did a Scots pine a couple of weeks ago. We're starting to see some growth on the root tips as we pull things out of pots. And that's about the time that you want to start doing this, just as things are starting to come out of dormancy. And I will make a note here that we've had a particularly cold winter. We're still falling below freezing at night. And so for a lot of folks in the Pacific Northwest, if you don't have a greenhouse or a way to protect your repots, I would be waiting. But because we do have a greenhouse that we can heat, we're able to go ahead and start that repotting. Once you've got stuff repotted, you really don't want it to freeze, especially all the way through. A light frost is okay, but that's something to really take into consideration is what your nighttime temperatures are going to be. But yeah, we're doing pines now. We've done some deciduous. We have not touched junipers yet. It's still too cold and rainy. We wait till kind of the end of repotting season for those, because otherwise they'll just kind of sit and be sulky until the weather starts warming up a little bit. So those are last on our list. But yeah, we're doing the whole range from conifer to deciduous right now.
And the junipers are different because for us, we don't get a really long, cold, soggy winter like y'all do up here. So our junipers usually get done around the same time, like early March, like right now is pretty good for them because I'm already starting to see some tips extend on them.
Oh, wow.
I think it might even be a little too late honestly, because of how warm we have been this time
Hmm.
around. And I think another thing we need to note too is that I noticed that a lot of our listeners are more global as well. So we have a good
Hmm.
number of listeners, especially I've seen a handful of them around the Australian, like Sydney, Australia area. And I
Hmm.
know right now it's like the flip
Oh
side
yeah,
over there.
totally upside down over there.
Yeah. And I mentioned that earlier when I talked to Josh Huson over with he's got his own Bonsai podcast. It's really good. I mentioned it earlier on. It's the modern bonsai podcast. But anyway, I remember it being the flip side there. But I
Hmm.
guess we could kind of describe what trees coming out of dormancy, what that time of year really is. I guess it's just and this is really just like plant science or biology 101. It's like elongation
Yeah.
of the day. Uh, nighttime lows are not staying below a certain temperature for certain species anymore. So for those who are listening outside the country, I don't want to kind of confuse y'all too much about that too. It's the extension of light and the nighttime lows really make a difference. So yeah, that's considering that Louisiana and especially for Mike and down in Florida is a lot closer to the equator, so it makes a lot more
Hmm.
sense, obviously. But Pacific Northwest kind of, especially, I guess you can say what the oh, I mean, is it different? Especially if you're like a little bit further east. Because I know, like they say,
Um,
it's pretty dry on the other, like especially like past where Mount Rainier is. It's like drier
yeah,
over there
I
too.
I don't know. It's pretty arid over there, but I don't know what the temperatures are like. So a lot of this, so in general, late winter, early spring is repotting, but you have to read your climate. So if you're, which I think
Mm,
is essentially what we're saying. So if you're freezing, if you're still freezing, you have to be really careful to protect your stuff, and otherwise, you can go ahead and still protect it from wind if you can, and extreme ups and downs of temperature. But um, once you're pretty steadily above freezing, you can really dig into it. I know back east Michigan and the East Coast, a lot of folks don't even start repotting until April, mostly because their stuff is still frozen in the ground. Um,
mm.
Depending on what their winter weather's been like. So
Yeah,
here I always feel like we're getting a head start. But yeah, it's been a slow winter spring season for us.
that's something to actually kind of bring up. I don't know if we've mentioned that in the podcast too much, that you're from Michigan and you have a
Yeah.
little bit of a different take on that.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
like with the collection over at the university, Michigan
Right. Yeah.
University, when does repotting on certain species over there happen?
Sure. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, I also I used to manage the bonsai collection over at the University of Michigan. I still have a connection with the university and am involved with that collection there while I'm apprenticing here. But I'm from Michigan. I've lived there my whole life until coming out here to apprentice. And so um, usually we wouldn't start repotting until April, mostly because we keep our trees um, outside in cold frames. So they essentially sit about 6 feet underground, with a roof on them. So they stay kind of at freezing temperature without, having to deal with the wind or the extreme temperatures. We've moved more to a cold storage system, so it's like an unheated greenhouse. Well, there's heaters in there when you need them, but which we keep at about, I don't know, somewhere between 32 and 42. So you can access the trees. We can start repotting a little bit earlier because it doesn't freeze through. So um, nowadays, if you have a cool greenhouse and protection, we can start repotting. I mean, we could do it now, um, but still, usually it's a March April thing, just because that's the trees, haven't really started to break dormancy. Um, it's still snowy and cold. Um, so usually we wait a little bit. So about the time we're done repotting in the Pacific Northwest is usually when folks back east would start repotting.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's one of the things I wanted to make sure I hit on because I've heard about cold frame structures
Mhm.
and having those set up for that reason. But I've seen other bonsai practitioners post about having to put their trees in cold houses, and I was
Mhm.
looking more where that range should be. And that's, would you say closer to the Great Lakes? I can't remember if it was northern or southern Michigan. you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm in Southeast Michigan
Hmm.
when I'm not here. And so really, I mean, even across, I think a lot of the central country where they have colder winters, like or it's real flat and windy and snowy. I think a lot of folks there have to put their trees away somehow safely to keep them protected. So really, it depends on your temperatures.
Hmm.
We could do a whole episode on winter protection.
Yep. Yep. That could be come back around for our check-in for
Yeah,
winter. I
for
mean,
winter.
this is technically spring. This is more of a early spring check-in.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, well, by the time this episode releases, just as a note for our listeners, we are actually a couple of days back. So
Mm-hmm.
things could be different. For
Mm-hmm.
instance, in Louisiana, we were 40 degrees. We even got a freeze about 2 weeks ago. And then right before I flew out, I, it was 80 degrees in the middle of the day, and all my trees were starting to open up. And I got really sad because I had to fly away from them while their new, beautiful, delicate, fresh leaves were coming out. I'm gonna miss all that first flush, but it's okay. Hopefully, hopefully Caitlin, my wife, sends me some more pictures. but but no, yeah, it could drastically change. It could be different. So I guess
Mm-hmm.
it's not like we need to put everything on a solid schedule. It's all going to be very
Right.
dependent.
Yeah.
Um, and that's another thing to note. I wanted to bring up, if you do repot a tree and then it starts to open up. And when I say open, it starts to launch buds, because it's any kind of root disturbance will tend to kind of, it doesn't like poke the bear, it doesn't wake up the plant out of dormancy necessarily, but any kind of root disturbance and then a slight amount of temperature increase and a little bit more light exposure will cause that tree to just trigger a little bit sooner. And so they will start to open up and begin to move. And in that case, and they're doing it out here at Cartagus, I'm seeing right now, is a lot of the trees are in the cold storage greenhouse
Mm-hmm.
that have been repotted. Even the conifers, even the pines and none of the junipers yet, like you said, but
Yeah.
um, either they don't need to necessarily be on the ground either.
No, they don't have to be on the ground. We just are running out of space.
Yeah, well, that too. Yeah, when you got a lot of bonsai and you have, so much space, you kind of just make it happen. But as long as they're covered, like you said, crosswinds is a really good point. Fresh buds that are kind of getting plump, a cold crosswind could really fry that bud. So I think this is also a good time to just be looking really intently at giving your branches close examination to see which buds are starting to swell. This could
Mm-hmm.
also give you a good idea. If you haven't repotted a tree yet, I think a good recommendation too is, if you're getting bud swelling and hard pushes in different parts of the tree, and not so much, you get like lackluster growth on some sections, or maybe even dieback suddenly, that might
Mm-hmm.
give you a signal to look at during repot, look for root rot, root disease, or any other things that might be happening.
Mm-hmm.
But that might not also tell you that it's exactly related to the roots either.
Right.
There could be something that took over from last year that's now becoming apparent now. So it is, it does, winter going into spring does seem like a slow season. But then those are things that you can really monitor and keep closer eye on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is for us, since it's our repotting season, it's one of our busier times. Um, but once we're through repotting, there's a little bit of a lull between that and a lot of our late spring and summer work, which is nice. That's a great time to keep an eye on things. So let's talk, I guess, a little bit maybe about how to tell when you have to repot something.
Oh yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. So
First
we
hand
like
experience
yeah.
from me on my
Mhm.
collection. I had a couple of my elms were just not actually
Mhm.
percolating. I probably said that terribly
Percolating.
wrong. Percolating.
There you
Um,
go.
yeah, this is actually not a bonsai podcast. It's a secret way to teach Evan how to say like English words correctly. But no, I still say weird things like I always, like, Caitlin gives me a hard time for saying pillow wrong. I don't know if you can hear
Mhm.
that. Yeah,
Say it
like
again.
pillow, like
Pillow.
yeah. But I don't know if that's wrong or not.
I think
Because
it's fine.
yeah, well, I think for a little while she thought it was pillow, like a
Pillow.
pill. Yeah, there we go,
Yeah,
pillow. Yeah,
pillow.
but you probably say it like that too, so I wouldn't even
I say
know.
pillow. You say pillow.
Hello.
Pillow. It's funny. Okay, that's a little silly.
No, 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 it's fine. Off
Okay.
topic
All right.
about
So,
pillows. No,
okay. So if your tree's not percolating, if the water's
percolating.
not going through,
Yep, that's one
yep.
good way to look at it. And
Hmm.
then let's see, weaknesses in a tree. Would you repot for maybe something like I think lack of vigor, even if it does
Hmm.
drain well.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. We had a instance here this past week where we've had this tree that drains just fine, but the tree hasn't been growing well. It's discolored. Um, they're just it's just kind of sitting there not really doing anything, and so we decided to go ahead and repot and see what was going on, and it turns out that probably 50% of the soil or the root mass had root rot. So if you have a tree that's really not doing well, um, taking a look at the roots is a great idea. Whether or not you actually repot, I know once you have it out of the pot, you can decide what you want to do, but giving it a look is a good idea.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's something that I think is a little bit different between deciduous and conifers and evergreen material. Is that deciduous trees will push to a point where they will clog their roots. Well, they're
Mm-hmm.
not, well, yeah, the roots will get clogged in a way that they'll block any kind of aerobic or percolation that could happen in the soil because of
Mm-hmm.
how dense the roots can become. Where it's different with like a conifer, the roots, and don't get me wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, was basically what I
Sure.
was saying is like I I see that conifers don't really put on as much of a root, like a coarse root mass as a
Mm-hmm.
deciduous tree is capable of, like long running roots.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right to assume?
Yeah, yeah, that's generally correct. You don't get the same kind of root growth. We had a maple that we repotted last week that we had repotted last year as well. So it's a young tree. It had pushed itself up out of the pot essentially. It had so much root on it. So it became, repotted 2 years in a row, whereas we have pines that'll sit for, I don't know, 5, 10 years sometimes between repots. I've heard in Japan sometimes, with a really established tree, it can be even longer. Um, but we have had some issues with water drainage in a pine. So that can often be caused by just mycorrhizal growth. So that's the fungus that grows within the roots of the symbiotic relationship with the pine. Sometimes there can just be too much of that, and it really makes it difficult for water to go through the pot. So if you have a pine that's not draining well, but it's only been a couple years, oftentimes that's a mycorrhizal issue. Um, that you'll have to deal with either by putting holes through your soil mass and backfilling with pumice, or we'll sometimes do a fungicide drench just to kind of knock back the mycorrhiza a little bit. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, the root mass of a pine is much different than a deciduous. You don't usually see the circling roots, the pushing up out of its own pot because it has so many roots. It's usually, if there's a drainage issue, it's a mycorrhizal problem.
Is that me hearing you say that sometimes too much mycorrhiza is not good mycorrhiza?
Correct. Sometimes there's just too much.
Yeah.
If you look at the bottom of your pot, sometimes you can just see the white of the mycorrhiza just completely covering your drainage hole. And at that point, it's like, okay, this is maybe a little bit much.
Hmm. That's
Yeah.
interesting. I haven't really. I know me and you were having conversations about this earlier in the day
Mm-hmm.
about mycorrhiza and whether or not it's there. Should we
Mm-hmm.
try to encourage it to be there? So when we go to repot and we were having to knock off a lot of those excess roots and all that excess mycorrhiza, should should they be scared of getting rid of all that? Is that
I
something?
don't think it's possible.
Mhm. And why is that?
It can be on a microscopic level. I mean, we can't always see the parts of the mycorrhiza you see aren't all the parts of the mycorrhiza. So it's very unlikely that you're going to be taking all of that out of the soil, even if you completely bare root it. So, I mean, sometimes we'll take, a little bit of the old soil and toss it in with the new soil to make sure that it gets in there. But with most of the pines here, and a lot of the pines I've seen that have mycorrhiza on the soil core, there's no need to really be concerned that it won't transfer over to your new soil. It definitely will.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's just basically saying, well, yeah, you said it in a really good way there, and I'm just thinking like there's no need to put additives if it's already present. And we were also
Mm-hmm.
talking earlier about how if you introduce a certain type of mycorrhiza, it might not even be necessarily the right type of mycorrhiza for the soil.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, certain funguses and mycorrhiza have a symbiotic relationship with certain species. And so if you end up putting a mycorrhiza with that, works with pine in a deciduous pot, it's not going to do anything, and vice versa. So a lot of times what grows naturally in the pot is what you need. And yeah, I personally, the personal opinion here, um, don't really see the need to add anything extra to that pot, particularly if there's already something there.
Yeah, because I've seen different mycorrhiza present in bald cypress versus Japanese black pine. It does exist, but it
Mm-hmm.
looks distinctly different. And
Mm-hmm.
and I remember earlier saying like how sometimes you'll mistake the rudolphs for mycorrhiza, and that
Yeah, that's the other thing
hmm.
to watch out for.
So you're looking for root density in some sections, weaknesses in branches, or maybe a tree's a little too vigorous. I mean, that could be an issue too. So, and I guess that's kind of one of the things we can talk about too is like what what do we want to do with certain trees at certain ages and certain points of development? Because you said just a moment ago you had this one
Mm-hmm.
maple that was younger and it's pushing roots a lot harder.
Mm-hmm.
What stage of development? Where's that tree at right now? Like, what is it? Pre-bonsai or is it more developed?
It's it's pre-bonsai, but so it's a young Japanese maple. But I will also say that we have a very old Japanese maple that we repotted last year that needs to be repotted again this year too. So it's not always about age. I think probably more often than not, your younger trees are going to want to be repotted more frequently. But um, that's one of the reasons it's important to go around your yard and check every tree. And so not just is it taking on water or is it strong or is it weak, but we actually take a sharp chopstick and check the first inch of soil within the edge of the pot. And if you can get your chopstick in fairly easily, you're pretty good. And if you can't really get your chopstick into that, where you would the repot zone essentially, if it's feeling really tight, if there's a lot of root growth in there, then we'll go ahead and give it a
Okay.
repot.
Yeah, because sometimes I'll look for roots growing through the bottom, but
Oh yeah.
that might not always be an indicator. I think also
Mm-hmm.
roots growing through the bottom of a bonsai container might indicate that your soil medium is not aerobic towards the top. Is that could be
Could be.
an evaluation?
It
Because
depends.
like I've seen in some
Yeah.
situations where a lot of running roots will occur at the bottom, and that means that a lot of water had
Mm-hmm.
gathered there. So if there's a lot of water accumulating at the bottom of the pot, that usually I'll see the presence of a lot more running roots, or like I repotted my Japanese boxwood, and the pot is very just bowl shaped at the bottom. It's a nanban or a nanban pot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's just naturally the shape of the pot.
I've actually found that a lot of times if there's more water at the bottom of the pot, there's not usually as many roots there. Um, but again, being from, the Midwest or the Pacific Northwest, that could be, and depending on the species we have, that could just be a factor of, where we're at geographically. So
I think something too, now that we're kind of going to water and proper drainage, is do you ever find yourself fixing bonsai containers if it doesn't have yeah.
yes.
So like for instance, one of the things that I do is I always have a drill and a diamond bit. Do y'all do that kind of stuff? Drill holes in
Yeah,
the
we have.
past.
Yeah, we
Always keep
have.
like
Hmm.
a quarter inch, and then also probably roughly about a 3/4 inch one for like an optimal drainage hole. So the 1/4 inch one would be for extra tie down holes. And then
Hmm.
something I was shown recently that I found to be just game changing was if you ever get these older bonsai containers in the corners where the feet have been stuck on, you'll see almost sometimes when they're cast, they have when I'm talking about by cast, when bonsai containers are made, there's a couple different ways that they can be made. They can be hand thrown, they can be hand built by the ceramic artist, or they can be poured into a cast in a cast mold that was previously a obviously they had made a mocked up version of the pot, and maybe the cast mold didn't have a part to include where the indentions of the feet are, and so you'll see on the especially on rectangles or ovals, you'll see like where the inside of the pot dips down and water can gather there, make it look like a little pool. And
Mm-hmm.
what I've been shown recently by another bonsai friend of mine was that she put plumber's epoxy in that space to raise that up so to make sure
Mm-hmm.
the water doesn't settle there and direct it towards the drain holes. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I
Oh, that's
was like,
interesting. Yeah,
wow,
that's a great way to do it.
that helps fix a lot of issues with bonsai containers that I've seen in the past, especially old
Hmm.
school like Chinese pots that I've seen some people use.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of times that they just don't have enough drainage, or the tie down holes are in the complete wrong spot.
Hmm.
Like, just because the holes are there doesn't mean you have to use
Yeah.
them. You can make your own if there's a better configuration for you, or if there's not enough.
And
Um, but be sure you use the right tool, because otherwise you can break your pot. And
yeah,
that's
and
always
it
very
comes
sad.
to like certain types of bonsai pots. You can drill holes through any ceramic with a diamond bit, but make sure that when you're drilling, you run a trickle of water so it doesn't overheat and then causes more cracking and more
Hmm.
friction to cause it to bust through. And make sure, and this is probably something that you can do if you're drilling holes in pots, take like a piece of foam and kind of soften the blow, especially if there's the feet on the pot are tall and you have a distance, because you coming through
Mm-hmm.
the bottom of that pot and then slamming onto the table surface or nothing below could cause you to keep going. And you could just
Yeah.
really, really biff up the whole thing. But if you don't
Hmm.
want to drill through a really old pot, in some cases we'll run into like really old pieces of Japanese tokonome or stuff like that, just high value pots. Usually the higher
Hmm.
grade, the higher quality of the pot, they should have good drainage, good flat interiors to those pots. So it's not much of a concern, but if you do trust yourself to not mess up that piece of pottery too much and then still make it functional if it's not a showpiece, something you would just rather keep on a shelf, it's always a good idea to go through
Hmm.
and make sure that that pot meets all those requirements. Um, so
Yeah.
as far as okay, so we kind of touched on when to repot and then looking for certain
Hmm.
things like mycorrhiza, and our little
Hmm.
bit of opinion on that. Um, reasons to repot and stuff like that. And so
Hmm.
one of the things that we can kind of talk about a little bit too is like soil and not get
Hmm. Time to get controversial.
yeah, not to get too crazy, but soil.
Disclaimer: everyone has their own soil mix that they claim works the
Yes.
best for them. Use what works for you.
But this is what we do. And we have good experiences. Saying good luck means oh thank God
Oh, good
that
luck.
didn't it didn't
Yeah.
die this time.
Thank
The
God
tree
that
didn't die
worked.
this time. Good. All right. Now
We've had good experiences with these soil blends.
early stages of development for some trees, soil's not really that big of a deal as long as it's good quality soil. But you can go ahead and use your expensive soil components for something like younger pre-bonsai. And the differentiation between pre-bonsai stock and bonsai is going to be something that's been grown or aimed towards becoming a specimen bonsai tree versus something that is that could be considered bonsai and more mature material.
Mhm.
And then we can kind of scale back to developing stock, stuff that's not pre-bonsai yet, stuff that is raw, something that might have just been dug out of a grow field just recently, or something that was collected from nature. Could even be a Yamadori, which kind of falls into its slightly own category. So
Mhm.
starting from the very back end of material, underdeveloped, raw stock, not yet pre-bonsai consideration, what kind of soil would you use at this point, Carmen?
Um, so I probably would not ever go into your standard potting mix. Usually for pre-bonsai and even the young stock, I like to use something that's really pumice heavy. Maybe add some composted manure, just for a little bit of an organic component, since you can get away with it at that stage if it's in a nursery pot. Um, it's not in a bonsai pot, so you're not going to run into the same issues there. There's good drainage, but I like to always go with something like a pumice blend of some kind, so that because at that stage, even though it doesn't need to be in your bonsai mix, it makes it a whole lot easier to develop a tree and work on roots if you're able to get to them. And those kind of real coarse volcanic soils are really easy to work with and develop a tree in. So I like to just kind of stick with pumice, or one of the bonsai soil components.
And with you saying bonsai soil mix, or our general mix, we're
Yes.
referring to pumice, lava, akadama. And I know the akadama part's
Yes.
that's the controversial kind of weird part that we can touch on a little bit, but for a couple of different reasons, but pumice, and we were talking about pumice is even a better, like, best, worst case scenario, more filler, but also does do a lot for the trees.
Yeah, pumice is really good. It's very coarse. There's a lot of airflow. There's a lot of water holding capacity. There's not as much nutrient holding capacity as something like an organic material like a potting soil. But if you're fertilizing regularly, it's not going to matter so much.
Pumice doesn't really break down as easily as
Correct.
akadama, and lava rock doesn't break down
Mhm.
hardly at all.
Right. Yeah, these are mineral soils, so they don't have the same organic components. When they break down, they're going to be more like sand and still contain that really hard particle, rather than breaking down into like a mud and a muck and creating problems.
Yeah. So like, for instance, like pulling a tree out of a grow field, is as long as the roots are correct and you don't need to do like a lot of catch up on that tree, I will drop those trees into pumice, lava, and pine bark. And it'll be pine bark, smaller particle pine bark, not big clunky stuff. That works very well. Actually, it works very well for when I go bald cypress collecting. We pull our trees out, we properly work the roots, and then we drop that. That's a question I get a lot about bald cypress Yamadoris. We drop them straight into that mix, into the pumice, lava, and pine bark. And then we're also using a shell clay product that comes in our general mix here. Well, I'm saying here, back at home currently, but that works fairly well, but it is missing that one component of akadama, which will be more of your mix component for developed trees. And is it when is a good time to start using akadama? I think would be right before, or maybe right at the pre-bonsai stage, to get it into the root core. Is that, we think about that?
Yeah, I think it depends, because on some cuttings that we have that we know we're going to develop from cutting to finished tree, we'll go ahead and use a pumice akadama just from the beginning, just so that the core, so as the tree develops, it develops with that core of pumice akadama. But I would say if you're working with pre-bonsai, I think is a good place to start adding in your your akadama. Um, and I guess depending on what it's been potted in previously, will kind of determine whether you do like a half bare root and then add your bonsai mix or a full bare root. That's all going to depend on what kind of tree you have and um, what soil it was in beforehand, if that makes sense.
And one of the things with field collected or like wild collected trees, I've seen in some instances where we'll be doing a partial bare root, especially on like conifers.
Especially on
And
Yamadori.
I'll see field soil left over in some of those trees, which I know it sounds kind of weird for some, especially if you're just dealing with exclusively like a nursery grown plant. You're just dealing with that big clunky rotten breaking down pine bark mixture, and which sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes it's peat moss, but sometimes in wild collected materials, see some hard packed clay or just field soil, just random stuff in there. But yeah, you don't jump at that straight away, take all that out, especially with those older trees like that. So
yeah, usually with that collected material, those will get popped into pumice or some kind of pumice mix. And then when they're ready for a repot, we'll go ahead and do a partial bare root and slowly work that field soil out. So it may even go into a bonsai pot with still, half field soil. And then the next repot, you remember or you write down that you have to go back in there and clear out that other half of the root zone or, the other third of the root zone and get that field soil out and replace it with the akadama core.
Yeah. So we could go in further on about developing fine roots versus coarse roots too. I mean, I guess that is something I would like to mention a little bit is when you're repotting, you're looking for finer roots, especially getting them down into a smaller container or whatever the goal is for the container size for the tree. So and that always varies so much. It's very difficult to just tell. That's why me and Carmen can't sit here and just go, okay, first take the tree out the pot. Now trim off the exterior roots. Now prep your pot and put the screen in there and tie it down. It's like, no, it happens so differently for each species and each time zone, each time of the year appropriate for each species given your zone.
Right. And the answer to every question in bonsai is it depends. Like there's never you have to have all of the factors. You have to know all of the factors that play into it before you can make a decision. But back to your soil, how to develop fine roots versus coarse roots. So in younger material, we're not focused. We're just focused on getting it to grow and develop. So we tend to use like a coarser mix. But once your tree goes into a bonsai pot, you want to be a little bit more careful. You want your particles to all be the same size. So, with your pines and your conifers, generally you use a larger soil size. You sift everything to make sure that you have a consistent particle size. And, with your deciduous trees and shohin, so small trees, you use a smaller particle. And that will develop, finer roots. It holds a little bit more water.
I guess the conversation about that is what stage are the trees at? And that's a great way to put it. Is like, it depends. It goes back to what's the drainage like in the pot, or is there anything going on top? And I probably, listeners might have heard me say this before, or maybe I've said this in a presentation before. Someone might have heard me say this, but whatever you see on the top is a great reflection of what's going on down below. And I think that's kind of one of my things I'm just going to keep saying, because as far as I know right now, based off of my experiences, that seems to be mostly true. I think this is another thing to kind of mention really quick is, like, if a tree is not growing, like if it's not pushing like it was, is it necessarily time to repot? So like if your tree's really kicking it and it's just going and it's growing you like 6 inch long flush and you're having to cut it back before it hardens off. And then the next year it really slows down. Is that necessarily
Mm-hmm.
signal a repot?
It depends on it depends. It depends on the stage of your tree. I mean, if you're in pre-bonsai stage and you're developing a tree and it suddenly stops growing, then you have a problem. But if you're going from, something that was growing really strongly and then it's still growing, but its internodes went from 3 inches down to an inch. Sometimes you want that. I mean, you're assuming that if you've pruned the tree, now you have more tips, so your leaves are going to be smaller, right? It's your tree's ramifying, so it's going to produce um, more stuff in more places, but it's not going to be as big. And that could be a sign it's filling up your pot as well with roots, which is a good thing. So it's not necessarily a bad thing if your tree, I don't want to say the vigor changes a little bit. It's still strong, it's still growing, it's just growing. I think more so you want to look for even growth over the whole tree. But as you ramify a tree, its energy is going to change a little bit. It's not going to, always have those huge extensions.
And it could be something about rebalancing the tree when it begins to grow.
Yeah, it could be yeah, there could just be a weak spot on your tree. Which is another, this is all another good reason to check with a chopstick to see, if it's ready for a repot. You can always go in and investigate without having to do a full repot as well if you have to. But yeah, a huge change in vigor.
Well, other things that happen during this time of the year, is there any other seasonal work that you can think of off the top of your head? I know there's wiring could happen on junipers.
Yeah, wiring on junipers can happen. I wouldn't do big bends because you could get some cambium slippage, but you could do
That's
some
a good
fine
thing
wiring.
to know. I've heard about some issues with cambium
Yeah.
slippage in that
Uh-huh.
I've not personally, but I've seen it recently.
Yeah.
And with other bonsai. So cambium slippage. Tell us about cambium
Mhm.
slippage a little bit.
So that's when like your bark kind of when you're wiring and you're doing a big bend, your bark can kind of come off of your cambium, whether you actually see it or not. It can really disrupt the flow of water and nutrients to that branch, and it can kill that branch off. So I would definitely avoid big bends if your junipers are actively growing in the spring. But you could do some fine wiring, and we're still doing some wiring on our conifers because things are still dormant. But we do most of our big bends in the fall, especially on the
Something
juniper.
else that can be done this time of year, switching over to a different type of tree, deciduous trees, is that when their buds begin to swell, is a good time to actually knock back for bud selection. That's a great.
Yeah. Yep. It's a good time. Yep. Bud selection. Any pruning on a deciduous that you didn't get done in the fall, you won't have as much. So best to prune those deciduous in the fall so that they can, so they can develop that another bud to push out in the spring. But you can also prune in the spring during repot.
So is it better for the fall from what you've seen, or?
Yeah, I think it's preferable to do it in the fall just because it gives the tree longer to recreate a new bud. But you
So
can do it in
hard
the
cut back
spring.
in the fall?
Mm,
That's a question.
it depends.
Yeah.
Yeah. Generally, I do a hard cut back. I think in the fall. Wait, hold on. I'm thinking. I'm trying to remember. No, I
Hmm.
can't remember. I think we do our hard cuts in the
That's what I was
spring.
thinking.
Yeah, hard cuts in the spring, but a lot of the refinement
Okay.
pruning in the fall. But hard cuts in the spring because otherwise, it's you have a better chance of an actively growing tree to heal that hard cut and send out a new flush.
Here's another one. Japanese maple, hard cut in the fall, hard cut in the spring. Yes.
Yes. No. No, that's not true.
From my experience, I've seen other bonsai practitioners cut in the spring, hard cut Japanese maple, even like stump them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've seen that
Yeah.
too. Okay.
I'm trying to remember. I feel like such a bad bonsai person,
but
I can't remember when
because
whenever we do a hard cut on a maple, I feel like it's always like, oh well, we should be doing this in the spring, not right now, or oh, we should be doing this in the fall, not right now, but we just do it anyway because we're there.
Yeah, sometimes decisions are kind of just made on hard cut backs, and that could be for multiple different reasons. But I think as far as keeping it simple, cutting deciduous in the fall is fine, and preferable with some species, I guess. And then springtime for really making sure that you get the bud placement correct. What's something else that we do this time of year? Are we going to do any? We're not going to do any hard bends on junipers, obviously. That's out of the question. Is there any differences between doing hard bends on junipers versus pine trees? Would that be something?
I mean, in general, I try to avoid hard bends in the spring just because you do run that risk of, it's just better to do when the tree is dormant or going into dormancy. Like here, our conifers are still dormant, so you could do a hard bend now, but usually we do try to save that for the fall.
So I guess that's one thing to go back on a little bit is like, it's not just specified to juniper, hard bends on anything.
Right.
And I guess one of the things, if there's early bud extension, that's a good time to, if you have a species that lignifies a little bit quicker than others, you could probably even get some fine wiring on those earlier pieces. That could help.
Yeah. We'll sometimes throw a little bit of wire on a deciduous tree now when we're repotting, occasionally.
I've seen in some kind of extreme cases, I'll see like a full restyle. And this kind of happens on tropicals, and I'd like to have Mike vouch for it in a later episode. But I have seen when their repot time for junipers is actually June, July, when it's warmer, because the tropicals really like it to be hot, obviously. Their length of day and their temperatures are a lot higher requirements. And so I've seen what they would call a top and a bottom pruning done at the same time. It's kind of like a derogatory way to say it, I guess. Top and bottom prune and then style. Some of those species can be stronger for that, but I've seen that happen during repotting season for tropicals. But sometimes deciduous, sometimes on strong species. I have done it with maples, especially like a trident maple.
Yep.
You can get away with that. But, and what about, I guess this is the last question is this a seasonal thing for right now? What about carving trees? How do you feel about carving trees this time of year? Like if you were to try to do something nifty, like make a hollow or do something like open cambium up, what do you think?
Nah, we usually wait until late spring, summer, for that, because then the tree's actively growing and it can heal a little bit faster. I guess it depends where you are. It's a little bit cool here to be doing that. Usually that's something we'd wait on.
Alternatively, down in Louisiana, where I'm working on our cypresses and maples, I actually do carves into new leaders this time of year. If I have a really strong leader that I'm like, this is going to be the top of my tree, I'll do my big slanted, rounded cut. You can see me do that on YouTube videos from the past 3 or 4 years ago now. But that, especially on like a bald cypress, that seems to be safe. I haven't had any negative. I've had like one tree kind of just be like, nope, and like the top died down on it. But that's like the one time. But I've carved many a cypress like that. But I've talked to Harry in the past, Harry Harrington, about carving in the summer. So he has more success. He has success with deciduous carving then, and you agree with that, yeah?
Yeah, that's when we do most of it. After everything's flushed out and hardened off, we go back and do a summer prune, and this is when we'll do a lot of our bigger cuts. And when we make those big cuts, we can carve them at that time as well, or we can go back and stubs that we've left, in previous years in the fall, or when it wasn't an optimal time to prune it, we can go back. We'll actively go through, shorten those, carve them smooth, cut paste them during that summer prune. We've had real good luck with that.
So don't do anything crazy creative over the top with your trees for carving at this time of year.
Wait till you have more time. Honestly, we're too busy to do anything besides repot release.
Kind of holds off. It's kind of like I don't know, almost like an assembly line for me with the cypresses, with the bald cypress. It's like, do I repot it? No, I'm not repotting it now. Okay, I'm carving into the new leader. That's kind of how, because the energy is not being sapped out of that tree. So I know it sounds contradicting for me to say that, but that's how it's done with that species.
Makes sense.
I've done it that way this the whole time I practiced bonsai like that. But anyway, so I think that's a good little chunk of information for this season. Bonsai never ends. So as we go on, we'll talk more and more about what to do. Late spring, early summer is definitely, like you were just kind of foreshadowing it on there. Foreshadow alert. We might talk about post spring going into summer, which becomes an early time. And the effects of going from this really awesome spring to sudden like hot death. It's kind of that's how it's like Portland and Louisiana share that just like strong, humid, sudden summer wave, and you're like, wait.
Well, ours isn't humid though. Ours is
y'all's is dried up. Yeah,
so good luck.
Y'all's is hot and dry. Ours is hot and humid.
Summer feels more like winter here because everything just kind of dies and stops. Whereas winter here, at least it's green and rainy.
Yeah, we get so hot that we go into a summer dormancy, which I think y'all do too.
Yeah, lately, especially because it's been so hot these last couple
summer
summers.
Dormancy, where like things are not necessarily dropping some deciduous will drop their leaves.
Some do.
Just out of,
they'll get cranky.
Like my Primna japonica, like shared some cuttings with you on that tree. That tree will grow beautifully in the spring and then come into the summer, and then all of a sudden it's like, holy, and then it like drops more than half its canopy. Yeah.
No, thank you.
But it's species specific stuff we could talk about a little bit later on. So let's.
So now that we've thoroughly confused everyone on how to repot the trees, see you next time.
This is valuable information. No, the bonsai word of the week, and.
Oh, yes. Let's not forget the bonsai word of the week. The bonsai word of the week is
tanuki.
Tanuki.
Which is it's a half dog, half raccoon.
There's this creature in Japan that looks like a raccoon, but it's actually a canine, and it's called a tanuki.
It's a real thing. Or is
it's real, yes. But in bonsai, it's the word for what?
It's another way to politely say your tree is a phoenix graft, which sometimes is looked down upon, and sometimes it's not, depending on the circumstance or how well done a phoenix graft or tanuki is carried out. And so just kind of break that down even further for our listeners who are not familiar with either of those. So you take a piece of deadwood that you think would be a charming bonsai that would have like a driftwood style or a shari, lots of shari. And then you take something like a juniper or a pine. I've seen it done with elms and stuff like that as well. And they'll either cut a channel into the deadwood or into the driftwood, or they'll meticulously position the other plant in a way to where it appears that deadwood or driftwood was part of the tree initially during styling, development, collection. And tanuki is a trickster in Japanese folklore. So that's why it's called that, because the creator of a tanuki is trying to fool the viewer into thinking this tree is ancient. And in fact, it was an old piece of driftwood or deadwood that they had found. and they introduced a younger plant to build branch structure and canopy onto it. And that's what I was saying, like sometimes it's looked down upon, but if you want to create your own tanukis, it's your, but
I've seen really good ones and I've seen really bad ones.
one thing we need to say though, even if it might be considered a bad one, it's still your bonsai garden. It's still your bonsai practice. So create one if you like, experiment all you like. But yeah, if it's very clear, then it's not really fooling anyone. But I don't want to be mean about it. But no, I have seen some tanukis and been like, wow, I wouldn't even known if you told me. So yeah. Thank you, Bonsai Word of the Week, for confusing everyone yet again. And also
you just go hug a tanuki.
Oh, don't hug a tanuki. I think the
don't hug it. Yeah, that's what the internet said. Google said don't hug the raccoon.
No, I would like to thank the raccoon that Carmen nicknamed Tanuki recently.
There's a tanuki that lives in the garden.
Yeah, he's been visiting
cute.
For the past week now, and
it's becoming a problem.
But no, he is cute. It's very interesting. I've never seen a raccoon just like walk straight up to me and like look me in the eyes, and you'd be like, "Oh no, it's gonna growl at me."
He wants to know if you have snacks in your pocket.
Oh yeah, he's doing those things that raccoons do with their hands, like where they rub them together.
Oh, so creepy. So creepy. Like... Yeah, so he's inspired our word of the week.
Yeah, thank you, Tanuki the raccoon. You're not a dog thing, you're just a raccoon. But anyway.
Just a raccoon.
Yep.
Anyway, that's all. That's the little things.
But yeah, as we always say, it's the little things. Little things for bonsai. For bonsai people. Not just the little things in life. So but yeah, but we will talk to you guys next time. I think for the next episode we'll be joined back with Mike. Yeah,
we'll put Mike in charge.
Mike's gonna be like, he's gonna listen back to the last episodes.
We can't be left to our own.
He's gonna be like, what have I done? He's like, I'm never touring India.
Oh my god.
Because no, he'll probably go back to India in a heartbeat. But he's like, I'm not going.
Yeah, he just won't let us record without him.
Trip without you guys. No. Oh yeah, we could do that. We could. Yeah. No,
okay, let's go. We'll all go.
Maybe.
Anyway. Okay.
But no. I think when he comes back, we're gonna have another special guest. We had David DeGrout last time. If y'all haven't heard that one, it's gonna be 2 episodes ago. So. That's an awesome episode. Go check it out. Very knowledgeable, very awesome bonsai curator. Lots of years experience. But our next one, we will have another guest next episode.
We've got a special guest coming up next time.
Now let's sign out before we get too more tired to record more episode. All right, so
too late.
So thanks for hanging out, Carmen. We're gonna go work on some bonsai here at the Cartagus Bonsai Garden this week, and you'll see some of that posted on our social media accounts. It's gonna be a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, definitely follow us for Carmen and Evan updates. You can follow me at Becoming Bonsai on Instagram and Evan at Underhill
and you'll
Bonsai.
see those there. All right, thank you guys. Y'all have a good one. We'll see y'all next time.
Bye.